All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. As always, host Brandon, my co-host Nick and Dan. And gentlemen, the season is officially ended as we concluded in the last pods with you guys. Thank gosh. But instead of just putting a bow in it and walking it away, we got to review it because we're gluttons for punishment. So we're going to do the 2022-2023 men's season review. There will be others. I feel like this leaves that door open, Nick.
It definitely will be. This is going to be done in two parts. First part, we're going to look kind of macro at the season, about all the changes that happened, and kind of give our grades on how things went down. The second part, which will be coming on Wednesday, is more of our lighthearted season awards. Although, again, I think if we were being honest with ourselves, Dan, maybe awards isn't the right terminology. Maybe it's just end of season grades or something like that. So this is kind of the two-parter that we're rolling into. Of course, we have to get this done. We have to make sure that we kind of have this for the history of the pod's sake, and that we're here for good times.
Yeah, we can't go into the 10th season of the London is Blue podcast without closing this chapter once and for all, particularly as today, on the 29th of May, we got the official announcement that Mauricio Pochettino is going to be Chelsea's next manager. It took a little bit of time for the announcement to come across, but I would remind people, we already did the homework much earlier in the month. We have a 2-hour special with Sam, CFC Central, and myself. We went through all the reasons why you should be excited, questions you should be asking, players who win, players who miss out because of this appointment. And so we don't have to go spend the whole time talking about it. I know Brandon and Matt are going to get into it later this week, going more in depth about what is going to happen now that Pochettino is officially announced, but it is an opportunity to get a little excited again, particularly at the end of a very unfortunate season, Brandon.
Right. Yep. Matt's been all over it. We've gotten a couple from him as well. So glad his prediction came true for his sake. But focusing on the season at hand, we've got a lot to get into. So kick it off. We usually do a 3-word match review. We can do 3-word season review. Dan, what are we going with?
Chelsea's calamitous carnival.
There it is.
It's a pretty tortured version of a carnival. Not one you want to go to. Not one you want to go to.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not a fiesta, that's for sure. Nick, what about you?
Didn't reach standards. Pretty clear cut there.
Well, I mean, not Chelsea standards, but Leeds would have been thrilled. I went with the hardest transition. And it kind of leads me into everything, right? Like that last season, the end was wild, right? Like the sanctions, not having Roman Abramovich, just having won the Champions League the season before. Life comes at you fast as a Chelsea fan.
Yeah. It felt like last season, Dan, was the cliffhanger. Like at the end of a really good series of TV, like your camera fades to black. You're like, holy shit, what just happened? This year, it's like season 8 of Game of Thrones, where you leave unsatisfied, and it's not what you want. So
definitely wasn't Succession, because Succession actually ended in a way that wrapped it up very well. I think you're still catching up, Nick, so we won't go into spoilers there. But ultimately, there was a lot of, I think, almost a more Sopranos ending style, where like you left very unfulfilled. It's like, wait, what happened here? What now? Like, there was a lot of really good stuff, but boy, oh boy, it just definitely did not leave you satisfied for that 6, 12, 8, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years after that.
Well, yeah, I think we can run it kind of back real quick. Shout out to Kenji, join us on Patreon. The Apple Podcast reviews are rolling in. The Spotify reviews are rolling in. We appreciate all of you for the support. It just helps us get our name out there to other Chelsea fans, and would appreciate it if you do it. If you've done one, flip over, do the other. It means a lot to us. So, Clear Lake won the bid. They took over, right? So this is kind of Clear Lake's first year. Obviously, Todd Boehly and Bedat Iqbali are the faces of this ownership group, with Boehly being I believe the executive chairman, definitely being the one pulling the strings, Clear Lake being the bank. We started late May, finally got the sale done, immediately jumped into a summer tour. The summer tour was pre-planned by the prior ownership management team. But what a great opportunity for American owners to bring the team over. Except it was insane. LA to Vegas to Charlotte to Orlando, lots of bouncing around. Boley, as you remember, Nick, was flying around the world, having many here for a good meal, trying to sign players, definitely getting players signed. And it was off. It was off like we were shot out of the cannon. And everything seemed like this was going to be, it was going to be great. Boley got cash. He's ready to burn it.
Yeah, it was very odd, I think especially as we kind of sit here today and we're thinking about everything that's happened and you start back at the summer tour, Dan, and you remember just how chaotic everything felt. The club had removed the previous management structure, i.e. Marina, Bruce Buck, all those sorts of figures. There was a lot of transition happening with current staff like Steve Atkins in the press department, stuff like that. Thomas Tuchel was being asked to take a more aggressive role in the summer transfer policy because there was no sporting director. If you remember back, Chelsea were trying to get Michael Edwards from Liverpool, and that didn't happen, obviously, for a slew of reasons. He basically took a year off to be with family. And then Todd is basically entered into this world that, he's wanted to be a part of, but didn't wholly understand, it felt like. And everything was happening all at once. I mean, that was kind of the feeling that we had on the ground, even talking with some of our journalist friends.
It was essentially the startup equivalent of trying to rush out your minimum viable product, your MVP, to get something together that worked enough to allow you to press forward, to build confidence, to assess the market, get feedback on is it working, is it not working. And so we eventually got to the point where we were getting like first two cities, like we get Sterling announced in LA, we got Koulibaly announced in Vegas. So there's excitement. I mean, even though it was chaotic, I think there was excitement with this idea of new owners moving quickly, trying to bring in players, trying to reinforce and support the manager, which is a phrase that we've heard time and time again, Brandon, where people are asking for, hey, we want players to come in who the manager wants, who are going to help us out, even at the point of getting Aubameyang in as well, missing out on a couple other players during the course of this time too, because we did not execute across every player that we went after, but it felt like things were moving fast. Things were, now that the sale was completed, things were getting done. It just was also, you didn't know what order things were happening in.
I mean, honestly, that was like the time when things were fine, at least like to that point. The longer they got in there, the more things started to kind of take a twist and turn and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, then we get into the season, right, where...
Well, could I just stay in the summer really quick and not to cut you off?
Sure.
But like one of the key things that we hadn't mentioned is Thomas Tuchel was not in a good place last summer.
100%.
Right. For personal reasons and professional reasons, he was being asked to do stuff that he did not want to do. His press conferences on the summer tour, we were a part of those, were bad Mourinho-esque in a lot of ways. And I mean, we remember talking to Matt and Naz on one of our live shows, and they kind of looked at us and were like, oh boy, like this is not this is not good. I mean, he came out with that now famous quote, we have the same problems because the same players are still here. He had sent a bunch of young players home from Vegas after not even featuring, but continuing to play Kennedy in our preseason matches. And then in Orlando, we absolutely got smacked by Arsenal 4-0. And the team looked nothing like the team that we saw previously that had reached 2 cup finals, won the Club World Cup, and almost pulled off the most miraculous Champions League quarterfinal result in Madrid. They looked listless. Players looked like they wanted to leave. Everything felt bad. I mean, just being honest about it. And I think we did our best at that time to kind of communicate that, because we've seen what bad preseasons have led to before, a la 15-16 season, and how that can manifest itself. And on the other side, you had this Arsenal team that obviously went on to bottle the league, but played pretty well for most of it. So it just wasn't good at all. And it turns out that you set it up for failure, and it's going to fail.
Yeah. A lot of the players are upset. It seemed like everybody was linked with a move away. It was very unsettled. There was not a lot of harmony, and we were pitch side, right? We had press passes pitch side, and there weren't a lot of smiling faces around the touchlines. They were very much there for their duty, and that made it tough as well. So a tough summer. And boy, oh boy, did Tuchel leave Florida with an absolute melter of a press conference. And they headed back to London. Remember, they played Udinese as well. We squeezed that one in, which was weird. And it was whatever. There was still hope. There was still optimism. Felt like we had some good signings under our belt. And then we get to the game, right? Kicked off the season 1 against Everton. Jorginho penalty. Never forgotten. And it was
that Spurs match, that second match was
Yeah.
utter WWE style chaos. Like, it was crazy. Terrible refereeing, the Tuchel Conte handshake that heard around the world. Just shithouse, just terrible.
Yeah, and there it really kind of set the tone for the rest of the season. Look, overall in the league, we ended up in 12th with a lot of 11 wins, 11 draws, 16 losses. Not good. 44 points. What's PY? Past year?
Yeah.
Previous year, yeah.
Previous year, fancy. Obviously, we were third last season, but do you remember watching the end of the last match of the day and rooting on Spurs to win?
Look, the end of last season, or the prior season, not the season that just passed, very much had a tale of two halves, where the first half of the season, bright, amazing, wonderful football, and then the back half of the season, which was, oh my gosh, this is really, really rough to watch through. I think some people might have been wishing for that style of football that they saw at the end of the prior season to drag and drop into this one. But yeah, it was to be 30 points less in terms of total position in the league, to basically trade out multiple wins, so 10 wins less than the prior season, and basically turn all of those into losses. Like, that regression is incredible. Like, that is a historic year-over-year regression from a team that has perennially been a top 4 team outside of 2015-16 for basically every opportunity that we had a chance to get in.
Well, and I apologize. That was 2 seasons ago. That was Tuchel's first reign. We were squeaking into top 4. Yeah, we got third comfortably for the most part last season. But we were all miles off City and Liverpool. 93 points City, 92 Liverpool. City love a good right to the end run of it, don't they? And we were on 74 points. Like I said, I don't know. It's just tough. FA Cup, lost in the third round to Man City right away, 4-0. We're in the final, losing to Liverpool on pens last season. The League Cup, we lost in the third round to Man City again.
Tough.
2-0
Tough draws in the old cups this year.
It is unlucky. But you would have hoped for something. Lost last year's final to Liverpool. Again, 11-10 on penalties. Massive, degradation there. Champions League lost in the quarterfinals to Real Madrid 4-0 on aggregate. This season, last year, lost in the quarterfinals to Real Madrid 5-4 aggregate. So at least we were in it last season. And those are the high level parts, right? That's where it all shook out. And I think from Chelsea's standpoint, as fans, like, that's not good enough, especially coming off of kind of the cup final run that we were under Tuchel. The league, not so great. But this season, nothing went great. Like, a little bit of glimmer in the Champions League, beating Dortmund, beating Milan, but like those are fleeting moments throughout a tough season. So if we look at our scores for on-pitch performances, I mean, I'm at the top of the leaderboard with 3 out of 10. So, I mean, Nick,
how
you were at the
did
bottom.
you get to 3? I'm really intrigued. that's a
Individual performances, like the fact that we have a good young core of players. They're, seeing Chilwell continue to come back from an injury and persevere, seeing Reece James just be an absolute, monster on the right when he's healthy. I really like the look of West Fofana. I think there's just some moments, right? It wasn't a complete wash, but, from a Chelsea standards, it was way low. And I still think 3 out of 10 is pretty bad for obvious reasons. But, there were bright spots at moments, just not many. And I think that the players and whichever staff was there at that moment should get a little bit of credit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give him any at all. I think it was a 0 out of 10. I mean, this is so far below standards. And I think the reason that I'm giving it a 0 out of 10 is there were multiple times in this season where Chelsea seemingly quit, right, on different managers, on themselves, on their duty to the supporters. And maybe that's harsh. Maybe if there are players listening to this, they're like, fuck you, Nick, and that's fine. I'm happy to wear that. I cannot believe how incredibly bad they were all season, how inept in front of goal. I'll let Dan read out the highlight here. How inept in front of goal we were, how shambolic the defense was at times, how lacking the midfield was at times. I mean, goalkeeping was probably the highest positional area of the whole team. And that wasn't, it wasn't a banner year there either. So, I mean, you kind of just look at it holistically, and you get 0 points, and may God have mercy on your souls. That's kind of where I'm at.
So the stat you're referencing is actually Philosophy putting out that the XG for Chelsea was 50.47 for the season, and we scored 37 goals. Erling Haaland scored 36 goals himself, so as we celebrated on the last pod, one thing that didn't happen is that didn't score against us and didn't score more than Chelsea as a collective club in the Premier League. And then his expected goal was 32.44, so he overperformed, no surprise. I went with 1 out of 10, and I basically gave every competition a point value. So you get maximum of 3 points in the Premier League, 2 for each other competition. If you got to the finals of a competition, which is an expectation, I think, for Chelsea, you get a full point. If you had gotten to the semis, I would have given you a half point. So that didn't happen across any of the competitions that we were in. So 2, 4, 6 points completely off the board. So 4 was the high, and that was great. And then in the Premier League, we didn't finish top 4. We didn't win. Didn't finish to the top half of the table. So I basically say that you didn't get relegated, so you basically got a point. Because I think to your 3-word season review, this is not within the standard that Chelsea should be setting for themselves. And as much as there were 1 or 2 really positive moments, the majority of this season, people are happy to see it in the rearview mirror and not ever come back to it again.
All right. Well, I mean, can't imagine anyone was expecting rave reviews on that, but on pitch, it was tough, right? And this really comes back to the players, for the majority of that. What are they doing on the field? Obviously, managers come into it, which we'll touch on here in a second. But first, we're going to take our ad break when we get back. The managerial go-around, right? The merry-go-round of managers and grades and how we can kind of break that down. Heads up. There was a lot. So thank you to the sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right. Managerial merry-go-round. Chelsea cycled through the most managers in a single season. It was tough to watch. It was tough to be there for it. But we kicked off with Tuchel. He lasted 6 matches into the season. 2 wins, 1 draw, 3 losses. Best result, beating West Ham 2-1. Worst result, losing to Leeds 3-0. That was tough.
Shocker.
Leeds are now relegated. I'll just run through the 4, and then we can kind of circle back. Potter brought in on a 5-year deal. Didn't even last a full season. 12 wins, 8 draws, 11 losses. Best result, beating Milan 3-0. Worst results, dealer's choice. Bruno came in stayed on as interim. No complete grade just because he only had 1 match in charge. So the draw against Liverpool is what his CV is. Lampard
the only
came in.
undefeated manager in this season.
He did it.
Bruno!
He did it.
Yeah,
Legend.
and survived the website. No, I never got taken off. Lampard came in as our savior, and it did not happen. 1 win, 2 draws, 8 losses. Best result was Chelsea 3, Bournemouth 1. Worst result, Arsenal 3, Chelsea 1. Obviously, there's Champions League and intermixed in there for a couple of them, but Dan,
do we think that Arsenal result is worse than the United result?
I feel like the Arsenal result was more, this is bad football, and that the United result was fluky, was my feeling. I felt like there was a lot of fluky goal activity. Okay. Again, that was just my suggestion for what I thought the worst result was.
Okay. Brandon, tie break. Any thoughts?
I thought about the same thing. I think that Arsenal, there was a little bit of title ramifications. They were flying high. United, it was just you're absolutely shattered at that point anyways. Expectations were underwater completely at that point. So, you just hope that you could have done something to spoil Arsenal's day. There's a little bit of hope. United, none. It was all bad. But Dan, Tuchel, we know what he's like. Then Potter, pretty much polar opposites. When you talk about managers, the owner said they wanted someone that was more collaborative, that was more communicative, that had an idea for a project, that wanted to build together, and they got Potter. That transition was huge. Obviously, to be fair to Potter before that, he had a lot of hype and a lot of excitement around him, right? Apparently, he'd been offered the Tottenham job. He felt like it wasn't the right offer and ended up coming to Chelsea. But he had credit to his name up until that point.
Yeah, and you look at where Brighton finished at the end of the season and where Chelsea finished, the sliding doors moments are going to be crazy for this season. I think on the whole, when it came to that transition, Tuchel a little bit more animated, built that camaraderie with the supporters over the time. I think it was a question mark for individuals saying the football's bad, but we kind of like the guy. We kind of feel like he gets Chelsea. Had to endure some of the roughest rounds of Q&A in the post-match and pre-match press conferences that any Chelsea manager has had to stare down during wartime situations, administration conversations. There's just a whole host of things that he had to deal with that not many Chelsea managers will say that they've ever had to deal with. And Potter was just a little more average in everything, very measured and responses. Even though at times, Nick, he was challenged on that and did indicate, yeah, of course I get mad. But really never rose to the point where there was that same type of connection. There never was that connection between Potter and the supporters for anything really that foundationally to be built for the future.
Yeah, I think all these guys underperformed. So just saying that out loud, right? I think everything was bad. Training methods were bad. Team performance was awful. Management decisions were terrible. I think you can make a pretty clear argument that once the first domino falls, and maybe you felt like Tuchel was really hard done by at that moment. Again, I will emphasize I was in Southampton when we lost the first time to Southampton this year, and it was abysmal.
There's evidence of you being there.
Yep, I was there. So I think once that first domino falls, the season's going to be a real challenge, especially that early in the season. I think it was first week of September he got sacked. Then Potter has to come in and his first managerial, his first game as a manager at Chelsea, I should say, is Champions League game, right? Which he's never managed before. He's only watched on TV. And then a World Cup happens, and then injuries happen across the board. One of those what if moments that I have is what if Armando Broya doesn't get injured in the warm-ups back from the World Cup? How different does the season look potentially, right? I think it was a Murphy's Law season across the board for this team. whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And that's why I'm kind of giving the grades as follows. Tuchel, 3 points, because we weren't losing a bunch at that point, although he had some destructive behaviors that are well documented. And I think Seb has put out some really interesting threads on him and decisions recently, if you want to go read those. Potter, 1 point, because we did advance in the Champions League despite how bad we were domestically. And Lampard, 0 points, just vibes. So that's pretty much how I feel. It's a macro perspective, Brandon. It was just fucking awful across the board.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the transition, it was the accumulation of things going on with Tuchel, especially the season previously, he was the spokesman, for the club week in, week out. And that was brutal, and we all kind of defended him. But it all broke in preseason, and it could be of what the owners were asking him to do. But when you divide a locker room into who's staying, who's going, and then still play those people, he made a couple of managerial mistakes that you can't do, and he just never was able to bounce back from it, and so it all fell apart. And I think what sucks about that is we just needed someone to grab the season by the horns and say, this is where we're going, right or wrong, get in line. And Potter was not that guy. So when they brought Potter in, you knew he was probably a yes guy to the owners. He just put his hand around everybody. And the problem is the season went sideways. He couldn't motivate them to change. And that was supposed to be his big thing, right? Emotional intelligence, leadership, all these advanced degrees. So it was not there. He was not able to get fired up. And the one time we saw a fake glimpse of fire, it was at a fan event.
Yeah, we're gonna win the fucking Champions League. That's
that's not what we wanted. I want you to sub someone off in the 27th minute and wring their neck. Show people that standards at Chelsea were there, and he didn't. Unfortunately,
he's an incredibly nice guy. Frank Lampard's an incredibly nice guy. Thomas Tuchel, maybe not nice, but respected, right? And I'm not saying he's not a nice person, just not the nicest in-game presence. None of them could get a tune out of these players. And part of the reason why I think we've talked ad nauseum about this team and what went wrong and where it went wrong, the players did not raise their standards. Yes, the managers are culpable for a performance up to a point, right? Because they can't control what happens in between those white lines during those 90 minutes. The players didn't stand up, and they weren't counted this year. And if you really want the story of how bad Chelsea were and why, those performances that we got week in and week out were just not good enough to pass muster.
So right. I went with, because I think that the score of the season and the manager score,
we jumped over you. That's my fault.
I know. They have to align. To me, they can't diverge, because ultimately the managers have the core responsibility for the on-pitch performance. And so I have 1 point to share. And if I look at who actually won with this team at points of the season, I divvied it up between Tuchel and Potter, because to the point that was made, look, Potter did get us out of the group stages and into the head-to-head rounds of the Champions League. Lampard had some really interesting lineup choices for the time that he was here. Thankfully, we did get to see Lewis Hall unleashed for a little bit. That was a nice thing. But just a lot of really unfortunate managerial elements this season that I think contributed to our on-pitch performance.
Yeah. I went with a couple points for Tuchel, one for Potter. My biggest problem, Potter, is his inability to learn. We did the same thing over and over. It didn't work. As a manager, you have to change and progress. We didn't. Lampard, too. Look, Lampard's the sacrificial lamb. I think, a lot of people said it absolutely took a bullet for the club on this one. It was bad. It was broken. And he was like, you know what? Fine. He put a little bit of his reputation on the line just to smooth it over. And I don't know how much appreciation he's getting for the club for this, but holy smokes, he he definitely calmed things down. I think we all kind of forget how bad it was at the end under Potter, and just having Lampard there really kept it from going absolutely sideways for the club. Like, they owe him a ton. I
think I agree with
PR wise, fan sentiment wise.
I agree with Sacrificial Lamb. I don't think he did enough to earn that next job. And
of course.
And I think, like, for me, part of the thing I said to Dan in our Newcastle review is I hope he finds a spot in talent identification, because I think he has the potential to be elite at that. I'm not sure on pitch management. Again, I'm not his fucking career coach, but like I'm not sure on pitch management is the thing. That's all.
Yeah. No, I agree with that too. Right. And I think a lot of people have echoed that, because he does know how a Conor Gallagher can be successful in things like that. So I don't know. I think he did a job. The results were terrible, but like, could you imagine if like Bruno had those results to the end of the season? I mean, like, thousands of fans would stop turning up to the bridge. I feel like it was just there was nothing left.
Fans also stopped showing up to, like, some fans already showed up or weren't showing up to the bridge. Like
not to the thousands, not to the level if Bruno would have finished out the season.
Even the lowest expectation of Lampard prior to him coming back for this stint, I don't think he cleared that bar. Like, I don't think he cleared the bar in terms of getting any performance whatsoever. The fact that it was one win in what I would say were very winnable games, like, we should have been off to safety much sooner.
The players weren't trying. They had nothing, absolutely nothing to play for, though. I mean, I know what you're saying, but I don't think anyone would have walked in there and gotten jack shit out of the team in the situation they were in.
I think he made some really bad lineup choices that were unnecessary, and turns out the minute you start playing Badiashile again, we pick up points, even though you had the opportunity to play him a lot. I don't know. We're splitting hairs. It was all fucking bad. So let's...
No doubt. All true.
Let's move it
all
on.
True. Yeah. Well, we're going to take our last ad break. When we get back, it's all about the transfer business and how Clear Lake did. Tell you what, January was busy. So thank you to sponsors, and we'll be right back. All right. So transfer business. We had a lot of departures. They're busy, Dan. Like, all being said and done, a ton of players left last summer. Some for money, some just terminated the contract. The first thing they did was immediately had to figure out what to do with Lukaku. Tuchel had said, nah, don't want him. Wasn't happy with what he did last season. Credit to Boley. He didn't question. He just went to work for his manager, and they ended up getting him to Inter Milan. Then they said, now we can build the squad. But until this piece moves, nothing else happens. And then a lot happened off the back of that.
Yeah, I think when you just look at the list of individuals who left, you had Timo Werner and Emerson who left, Billy Gilmore left, Mishi ended up leaving on a permanent finally. You had Kennedy leave, and then you had a bunch of people leave on free transfers, right? So people who had left kind of in that intermediate period between the club being acquired and the end of the FIFA calendar year. So Rudiger, Christensen left. Players like Miazga, Musonda, Marcus Alonso all ended up leaving. And then you did have some loans outgoing as well. So Callum Hudson-Odoi, Bob Rockman, Ethan Ampadu, Andre Santos, who we acquired and then let him go back out on loan. That was a little bit later. And then the only really outgoing that happened for the remainder of the period was Jorginho leaving in January to go to Arsenal.
And again, terminating the contracts of Drinkwater and Barkley, which I think was a good sign, Nick, that the owners were willing to see when it wasn't going to go anywhere. The last regime would have extended and punted somehow again. They're like, nope. And to be fair, it's probably best for the player too.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some really good business in here. Obviously, losing Rudiger is tragic when you think about how much money we've taken to replace him. We could have just given him a better deal and saved a bunch of money there, right? Lukaku was among the worst transfers that we've ever had, and of course, it's terrible business. But getting a tune out of Timo Werner transfer and figuring out a way to get rid of your Batshuayis and your Sars and your Kennedys and that sort of crew set the table for us to do a lot of business incoming, Dan. So I don't know if you want to just take out your scroll and read the entire list here, but it's a hell of a lot of money that we've spent.
Yeah, it's stack ranked in the largest spend to lowest spend. So you had Enzo, West Fofana, Mudryk, Kukureya, Sterling, Badiashile, Koulibaly, Madueke, Gusto. If you remember him, we brought him in as well, but sent him right back to Olympique Lyon. We had Chukwuemeka, Santos, David Datra, Fofana, Aubameyang, Joao Felix on a loan, Slonina, and Zakaria coming in on a loan. And yeah, I mean, you did have two players coming back off of loan in Gallagher and Broya, and then that kind of rounds it out. This number here in transfer market is 611 euros as of the transfer sums that have been reported. So not a cheap bill, not a cheap meal. That's I don't know how many Michelin stars that would account to in
30,
a conversion table.
30
but
Michelin
it's a lot.
stars. Yeah.
The big thing here is the January, right? So obviously try to make a few big but key signings in the summer. We brought in some sporting directors. Things kind of changed, Nick. We heard from insiders that it kind of felt like every new director got a signing in January. And we'll see how it all shakes out. But come this winter one, young, long contracts and high potential players. Now, are they all the same? I don't really know. It does harken back to the Emanalo days as far as a strategy, get the young, best promising players and let them, develop into their best form. Unfortunately, Chelsea's never done great at letting them develop into their best form. But if anything indicates that they're going to try it, it's now. Because those signings, I think there's a couple times we were like sub 24 years old for average age on pitch, and that was with Thiago Silva. So clearly this would indicate a very different strategy moving forward.
Yep. So your Enzos, your Mudryks, your Badiashiles, your Maduekes, your Gustos, of course the younger guys like Chukwuemeka, Santos, David Datra, Fofana, and Slonina kind of make up that core of like 23 and under types that exist within the team. And that is a smart strategy, right? Why pay $100 million for them in 3 years when you could pay 30 for them now or whatever and help them grow into the £100 million player or whatever. So there's logic there. Yet to be seen if any or all of them work out in the way that we had hoped. I think there's a lot left to be determined because the team played so badly this year. But some bright spots in there for sure.
My personal kind of breakdown of how we did, right? I think the summer signings on paper look good, but again, the season was so trash that like it didn't work out. We definitely could have, should have seen more from Raheem. Definitely could have, should have seen more from Koulibaly and Aubameyang. Poor. I actually feel bad for him, and I never thought I'd feel bad for someone with a chrome gold Lamborghini, but turns out it can happen. So with that being said, from a scoring standpoint, I am excited by the January transfer window, right? I think there's a lot of young, exciting players in there. Thought even the Zakaria deal was clever. I thought the Felix deal was not clever because even if it turned out great, it was always going to cost a fortune. And so, I think that we signed gave Neil Bath a lot of power as well. We think of Cassidy. Obviously, Slonina's on here. Amari Hutchinson's coming in. I think that there was a lot of good business done. The hard part, guys, is we have no idea what this ownership structure is going to do with these players. That is the hard part. But when I look at our roster going into next season, if we can get our shit together and put the pieces together, minus a few key signings, I feel pretty good. And if you can get this group to work, it's going to work for a long time. or you make a lot of money off the back of them. So I actually do think there's some good business in here. The problem, Dan, which is always, who can put these pieces together to make them successful? I don't know. So if you're purely going off of incomings and goings, I give it a 6 out of 10, mainly because I think there's a lot of talent, but I think we also overpaid and had some bad pricing, especially with the Joao Felix in there as well.
That is very complimentary.
Enzo's
am a little
big.
surprised. Enzo's huge. Look, I think...
And kudos to that. Like, a lot of teams wanted him in January.
I will say, I think there were times where the way we went in and made something happen that we wanted to happen, even through the hesitancy of the other party, that was a positive sign. I think what's maybe concerning is that it seemed like it took Egbali or Boli to be in the room to make those deals happen. And again, they have
they got the
direct
checkbook. They're the only ones that had the...
They do have the direct connection to saying yes to releasing the funds. So that does give them a little additional power to go in and make the decision and just go. There's not an additional layer of technical director, co-sporting directors that need to go up and ask for permission or say, hey, we're going to go above our bound. Can we do that? I will say, I think you didn't get enough outgoings, but I understand that was a bit of a challenge with the time window. I think there was still too many players in the side at times this year. I think that you brought in 3 players who are regulars or contributors at this point now. I think you brought in Badeshio, Enzo Fernandez, Wes Fofana, who are just, they're contributing. They are going to be a part of the team next season. They'll be either primary starters or they'll be like a massive rotation player, or they'll be competing for a position. I think there's a lot of other prospects that we brought in who are not finished articles, who are going to require coaching. And so I think there's a mixed kind of question mark right now on like, can we get them to develop to where we think they can? Because if they can, this is great. And I would come back and revise it. Like, I think that, like, people give draft grades, right, in the NFL. Like, oh, they won the draft, but, like, nobody knows how they're going to project out. It's just some random person's opinion, just like this, on whether or not that we did or didn't hit. And I would say at least right now, we didn't move the needle enough in terms of pushing the entirety of the team forward, both through addition and subtraction. I'm very excited about a couple of players who do have, so I gave it a 3.
3's harsh for me. I went 5. I think there is some real talent in here, and like a lot of the talent that I think will materialize. Your Andre Santos, your Cesar Casadei, your Carney Chukwemeka, maybe your Malo Gusto, maybe Noni Madueke, are yet to really emerge. Right? I think they're too young to really be counted as a negative. I think there's some business in here that's brutal and bad. And I think that there is, I think Brandon's pointed out a handful of the really good ones. Obviously Enzo.
I forgot we got the Reese extension done. I didn't even put that in there.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some good business in there. I have it at a 5. So I'm just a little less than Brandon. But I think the reason I have it as a 5 and not a 7 is because there is some work to do with current players, Mason Mount, that didn't get done in any sort of timely fashion and is now on the precipice of going horribly wrong. If that does go wrong, I'm going to drop that rating pretty quickly because it's going to take a lot of money and talent to replace someone like that. And so right now it's a 5, right? If they get it done, it'll go to a 7. If they don't get it done, it'll go down to 3.
That's an unfortunate, kind of thing haunting and looming as we go. But, I think overall where we want to talk about the football performance, the transfers, the stadium, and everything else into account with this ownership group. Because if you think about it, I mean, they did a lot. I mean, they really did. Like, the ambition is high from this group. The soccer understanding the landscape, I think, is low, but they're trying and they're willing to throw their weight around when they can. I think they listen to fans as best they can. They want to do right by the club with the stadium and the financials. But at the end of the day, how did they execute against all of those things, against those targets? I think a lot of us have been in those year-end reviews. Hey, here's what we set out to do. Here's where we got. How did you operate and handle the ups and downs throughout the season? I tell you what, it turns out you can love bomb me all you want, Nick, because that January transfer window gave me a hell of a lot of hope. Even that much hope, I still lost it all a few months into the second half of the season.
Months?
And I mean, the Dortmund revitalized it for a day, right? Our trip to London, and probably as us being there, like, gave a little bit of a boost, but it was all a downhill slide. And so I think operating against, you hear Matt and Naz always talking about how they replaced almost every single department in the background, the ground crew, the medical department, scouting, data, whatever, probably culinary. We didn't even ask about that. I think for me, that much change is what has kind of sabotaged the on-field success a lot. Too much change for these players who like habit, who like familiarity, and it was all taken away because of that. I think it has to be like, a 5 out of 10 at most. But I feel like they're still making progress on the big things. Stadium, commercial, getting the right people in. They're willing to spend money and hire people, but none of it has come together yet. And it might be a year too soon. We can only hope it's only 1 year too soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of those reasons, I had a lot of those written down as well. I'm a 3 out of 10. I think the upheaval was just too much. And I think there were smart decisions that were made, but they won't be realized until this season or even the following season, right? The upcoming season or the following season. So, I think for that, it's a pretty low grade. To their credit, though, Dan, I mean, they've said as much in club communications too. Part of the, in the statement they made around freezing season ticket prices, they acknowledged that this season was not up to standards. Many of the players even have come out on Instagram and said this season's not up to standards. Now that means fuck all unless you actually go do something about it next season. But I can't have it higher than a 3. It was a pretty big disaster.
When I was thinking about it, I went back and looked at the results. I was looking back at the data year over year, season over season, evaluating against the players who were here. Obviously, we had a lot of injuries as well, which always makes it, I think, challenging to grade full capacity when you're basically missing N'Golo Kante for the vast majority of the season. That's never good. Reece James, multiple injuries and out again this year. It came back to not being, I think, the season that Clear Lake and Todd and Badad would have wanted in terms of a first season in the Premier League and owning the club. If it wasn't the first season under new ownership that I think the players wanted, definitely not the season the supporters wanted, definitely not the season the managers wanted. So I think for that, there were a couple of good things. I mean, obviously, the work they started to do back with Paul Cannaville throughout the season, the continued support for the Chelsea Foundation. I know this isn't necessarily the women's recap episode, but the work that they did with the academy to continue to give us a pipeline of future development. I think the work that they did with the women's team, continue to allow them to be empowered to go win again and again and again. I think this is more of like a total holistic grade, and so that's where I think a 3 is probably right for me. If it was just the men's team, I think it maybe is like a 1.5, 2. It was in recent memory, in the memory of doing this podcast together, this is the worst season that we've covered. And there have been other seasons that are 5, 6, 7. It's not near any of those seasons. So it has to be low, just comparatively on the scale that we've set for ourselves.
Well, I think it hurt more than other seasons is because like the bones were there, the talent was there. I think we've had other seasons where we didn't feel like we reloaded at the end of the season and we came in a little lackluster. That was not it this season. So unfortunately, it will kind of wrap at that. That's our season review. But we do have awards, some of them good awards, some of them not, that we will lock out as well. So you'll have a second part to the season reviews. We try to recap it, but let us know what you thought. Again, managers, owners, the grades of transfers in and outs, and what you thought the whole season was. Obviously, we try to keep it on a scale of 10, so use that to your point. Might surprise you because I think none of our scores are anywhere close to that. But yes, we technically were 1 out of 10. So anyways, appreciate all of you. We'll be back, ton of content, player awards and season awards up next. Until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.